Hi everyone, I hope you're well. Super beautiful day today. The book I chose to read today is called Luba and the Wren. Luba is the name of the character, and a wren is a little bird. You can see a picture of that here. Patricia Polacco wrote the book, and she also did the pictures. And you can pay special attention to how the pictures look today after you know that she started making art and drawing pictures when she was super young, and it became quite a talent of hers, right? So what I want you to think about when I read this story is a word called generosity. Generosity is a word that means to be generous, and when you are generous, it means you think of other people's needs and you think of ways that you can give to other people and help them when they need it. This is a story that shows kind of what happens when there isn't generosity and how that can turn out when the characters spend a lot of time thinking about what they can get for themselves and what they can do for themselves, and not a lot of time thinking about others or about what they need compared to what they might want. So this book, I'll tell you from the get-go, is fiction. It is not a true story. You know, Patricia Polacco tends to do both. She does some nonfiction, which are the stories that are all about her growing up time. And then she does some fiction, which are stories like Aplamondo's Dreams, for example, that are not true, things that didn't really happen. And there's some pretty serious magic in this story that helps us to understand that it's fiction. Luba and the Wren. Once there was a poor farmer and his wife. They lived with their only child, Luba, in a humble dacha in the clearing on the edge of a deep forest. Their house was crowded and small. The roof leaked, the fences needed mending. Mending means to fix a hole in something. If you have a hole in your sock, you might have your socks mended. If you have a hole in the fence, someone might fix that. So that's what they're talking about. The fields, although lovingly tended or taken care of, were meager and bare, which means there just wasn't much growing in their fields, even though there were farmers. They had little comfort, but their daughter Luba was full of joy and free from care, as all children should be. So even though they didn't have a lot, their daughter Luba had a great life. She was happy. She enjoyed what she was doing. She didn't worry. One day, as Luba was looking for mushrooms deep in the forest, she heard a small, pitiful cry coming from the tree above her. There she saw the most beautiful, delicate little wren caught in a fowler's net. She took pity on the little creature and climbed the tree to free it. It took wing and sang a glorious song. So taking wing is just kind of a fancy, different way of saying it flew. So the bird flew away. And then it fluttered down from the sky and landed on a branch next to her. To Luba's astonishment, which means she was amazed, the little bird spoke. "My dear, how can I ever repay you for saving my life?" it asked. When Luba found her voice, she replied, "I would have done the same for any creature, little one." "For your kindness," the bird said, "I shall grant you any wish that you may ask of me, for I am enchanted." That means magic. So the bird is saying, I'll give you any wish you want because I'm magic. "But I am content. I have no wish," Luba said shyly. "If you ever want for anything, come to the forest and call me," the bird said. Luba said she is content. That means she doesn't feel like she's missing anything. She doesn't feel like she needs anything. She has everything she wants. Luba ran all the way home and burst into the house and told her mother and father all about the enchanted wren. "Foolish girl," her mother groaned. "Why didn't you ask the wren for a bigger house?" "You know how hard life is for us. We are so poor," her father said. "Couldn't you go back and ask?" her mother said wearily, which means tiredly. "Go back to the forest. Ask the wren for a bigger house on fertile land. they begged. Fertile means land that you can grow lots and lots of things in, lots of plants, lots of crops. So if you're a farmer, you really want there to be fertile land where your crops will grow. Luba did as they asked and went to the edge of the forest. Little Wren, please come to me, she sang out. Dear one, the wren chirped as she landed on a tree branch above Luba. What is your wish? It is not mine, Luba said. It is my parents' wish that brings me back to you. What then do they want? Asked the wren. A bigger house. They would like to have more room and also to have land that is rich and fertile so they don't have to work so hard to grow things. Go then, dear one, said the wren, for it is already done. Sure enough, as Luba got to the clearing where her small dacha had been, there stood a grand farmhouse indeed. Her parents greeted her, which means they came out to say hi when she got there. Their clothes were new and not holey and patched. Their land was lush and fertile. Lush means green, full of plants growing. The orchards were full of trees, heavy with ripe fruit. Luba's heart sang. She knew that her parents would be happy and content. There's that word again, content, feeling like you don't need anything. But alas, within weeks, they were pacing the floor, walking back and forth. We have been thinking, they said together. We would like to have an even bigger house with more fields and workers to help us farm. But I have already asked the wren for this wonderful farm. How can I ask her for more? Luba asked. You saved her life, her father said sternly. She owes this wish to you. Now, go and ask the wren for a manor house with acres and acres of land, her mother ordered. Luba went to the edge of the forest and again was reluctant, which means she didn't feel comfortable calling the wren, but the wren came as soon as she heard Luba's voice. Dear one, what is it now? The wren asked. It is not for me, and I wouldn't ask again, but it is my parents. They no longer like the farmhouse. Now they want an estate, which means a really huge house and piece of land, with acres of land and servants, people to work for them. The wren could see that the child was ashamed. Ashamed means embarrassed and feeling like this isn't a good thing to be asking for. Go then, my dear, the wren said, for it is already done. And when Luba returned home, there, instead of a big farmhouse, stood a graceful house of estate, surrounded by lush gardens, green again, and ponds and honking geese and swans. As she entered the house, her father was seated by the fireplace in a grand chair. He was truly lord of the manor. Her mother was seated next to him, being tended by handmaidens, which means there were women there taking care of her mother. Spread before them was a great table glowing with all kinds of wondrous things to eat. Now Luba was sure they'd be happy and content. But just as before, Luba awoke one morning to see her parents pacing the floor. We have been thinking, they began. Since the wren can grant us anything we want, why didn't we ask for a palace in the first place? But Mama, Papa, Luba pleaded, I cannot ask the wren again. Ah, but you can, her father hissed. After all, you saved her life, didn't you? She should be grateful, her mother bellowed. Go now, they ordered, and not only do we want a palace, but we wish to be the rulers of all the Ukraine. The Ukraine is the country that they lived in. So now, Luba's mother and father want to be in charge of the whole country and live in a palace, which is like a castle. Luba walked slowly to the edge of the forest once again. Her heart was heavy. That means she was feeling really sad. The sky was gray and dark. The forest looked bleak and unfriendly. Luba called for the wren, and the wren came. "What is it that they wish now?" the wren asked sternly. "Well, now they want to live in a palace and be rulers of all the Ukraine," Luba answered, barely able to speak. "Go then, my child," the wren said. "It is already done." So now the wren, who's been super patient, which means she hasn't been upset with Luba asking for all of these things, is in the words it said that she said something sternly. Sternly means that she's not super friendly or cheerful anymore. She's more like strict and stern, and what else do they want, kind of like that. So she's starting to not feel patient, not feel generous with all of the things they're asking for. When Luba arrived home, she stood in the courtyard of a majestic palace. Everywhere she looked, there were uniformed servants and guards, and when she entered the palace, there were her parents, surrounded by chancellors and vice-chancellors and noblemen from all the counties and the estates in all of the country of Ukraine. I hope that this makes them happy at last, Luba thought. So all of those names, servants, guards, chancellors, vice-chancellors, noblemen, those are all of the important people who are in charge of running a country, who are now in the palace with her parents. And they were for a time, but then one morning, Luba awoke to find her parents standing near her bed. "We have been thinking," they said. "Being rulers of the Ukraine is not what we thought it would be. Go to the wren and ask her to make us the Tsar and Tsarina of all of the Russias." This would be a combination of countries. "This I cannot do," Luba said. "You must," they said. "After all, we are the rulers of Ukraine, and you must not disobey." When Luba got to the forest, the wren was waiting for her. The sky was full of billowing clouds, gray and stormy. Lightning crackled at their edges. "Now, what do they want?" the wren asked impatiently. So at this point, she's not even being friendly. She is frustrated with all of the things they're asking for. "They want to be the Tsar and Tsarina of all the Russias," Luba answered as she sobbed. "Go then. It is already done," the wren said. As Luba approached the clearing, she saw the onion domes of the Tsars gleaming in the sun. Then she saw her parents, the Tsar and Tsarina of all the Russias, drive up in a golden coach, festooned with riches and splendor that she had never imagined in her life. Surely, she thought to herself, this will finally make them happy and content. So if you look at the picture, you can see the tops of these buildings. Remember, they're called the onion domes. We talked about the onion domes in the book Rishenka's Eggs, about the goose who laid the beautifully painted eggs. Because there were onion domes in the town that Rishenka went to sell her eggs. And that's the decorative tops of the buildings that are in this part of the world, in this case, in the Russian countries that there were at that time. This time it seemed that at long last they finally were happy. Then one day Luba found them pacing in the great hall. As Luba approached them, they said, "Ah, Luba, we were thinking, now that we're the Tsar and Tsarina of Russias, we see absolutely no reason why we cannot be the emperor and empress of the entire world." Luba couldn't even speak. "Go to the wren and make this so. We command you," they said. Luba hardly recognized her parents anymore, but she did as they asked, and when she entered the forest this day, the sky was blacker than black. The trees twisted harshly. Storm clouds rolled angrily in the sky. The wind seemed to push against her every step. The wren was there, waiting for her. "What now?" the wren snapped. Luba didn't speak for the longest time, but finally she found the words. "They wish to be emperor and empress of the world." "Go then," the wren said. "It is already done." Luba stood in the majestic throne room, and there seated on the tallest thrones were her parents, Emperor and Empress of the world. They didn't even speak to her. Leaders from all lands near and far were bowing at their feet. At long last, Luba thought, they're happy and content. And then one day, as all the times before, she saw her parents standing, looking out the window of her room. "We've been thinking," they both hissed. "We want more. Much, much, much more. We want to be gods," they said. Luba was stunned. "No, Papa, Mama, do you hear what you're saying? This is sacrilege." "Silence," they thundered. "Go ask the Wren." Luba went to the forest. Never had the journey taken so long. A fierce storm raged in the sky above her. The wind howled, the trees writhed and shook. But the Wren was waiting, and Luba could not find the words to ask the wish. She just stood and cried. "And now?" the Wren asked, almost angrily and a little bit sadly. "They want to be as gods," Luba said. And she choked the words through her tears. So she was crying so hard that it was hard for her to talk. Lightning slashed the sky in half. The thunder cried out Luba's name, and the ground pitched and buckled under her feet. "Go then, my child," the Wren said softly. "It is already done." Luba walked sadly back to the clearing. Her steps were heavy, her heart ached. But as she reached the clearing, she was astonished. There's that word again, which means very surprised. To see her little dacha, that dear little house just as it was before. The fences needed mending, the roof leaked, the fields were meager and bare. And then she saw her mama and papa sitting on the front porch. Her mother was mending torn clothing. Her father was carving a piece of small wood. "Here is our dear treasure now," her mother exclaimed. "I made this today just for you," her father said as he showed her a carving of a small wooden bird. "Was it wonderful in the forest today?" they said as they stretched out their arms to her. Luba leaped into their warm embrace. At long last, her parents were happy and very, very content indeed. This is a super pretty design at the back of the book. And so when we started the book, I wanted you to think about a word called generosity. And generosity is a word, like I said, that means a way of thinking where you think about what other people need and you think about what you can do to help them and you think about things that you can give of yourself to help other people. And in that story, the more and more and more money and power the parents had, the less generous they became and the more they thought they needed. And there's a difference between what you need and you want. And I think in that story, you can see that once you kind of get so far beyond, it's hard to stay focused on the things that you might need and the ways that you might be able to help other people in your life. And so the lesson that I take away from that story is no matter what, whether you have lots and lots and lots or a little bit, it's always so important to keep other people in your mind and what they might need and what you might be able to do to help other people, rather than to just look at ways that you can always have more. You can instead look at ways that you can help others with things that they need. So that's what I think about when I hear that story. And then there's that whole magic element that, again, helps us to understand that it's completely fiction, that this little bird is able to make all these crazy dreams come true just like that. And then there's a little poem by Shel Silverstein that talks about magic and how sometimes you might hear of things that are magic and wonder, is that true? Did that really happen? And so this little story, this little poem helps you to helps to kind of explain that feeling. It's just called magic, and there's no picture that goes with it. So what happens when there's no picture? You make the picture in your mind. and it's very short. It says, Sandra's seen a leprechaun. Eddie touched a troll. Lori danced with witches once. Charlie found some goblins' gold. Donald heard a mermaid sing. Susie spied an elf. But all the magic I have known, I've had to make myself. And so what that makes me think about is just the imagination that it takes to see a leprechaun, to touch a troll, to dance with witches or find some goblins' gold, or to hear a mermaid sing or see an elf. It takes a lot of imagination to see and do those things. And so when you want something to be magic, you can just make it. You imagine it in your head, and you can imagine anything. That's the great thing about imagination. So I hope you liked the book today, and I will see you tomorrow.